Minecraft is truly a world of wonders, a place where you can conjure up anything from your wildest dreams that you wish existed, like a farm whose entire harvest will yield exactly 4 pieces of bread, or perhaps your dream place for escaping the torture of touching grass. The possibilities are truly endless, and to make all of these things happen, you're surrounded by a world full of resources. Normally, when you start off in a brand new world, you'd usually start in an area with immediate access to trees, food, and most things essential to not die. However, would we still be able to actually survive and successfully beat the game if we didn't have that luxury? But instead, we'd spawn in a fiery hellscape designed to contain the most violent, barbaric, and sadistic monsters known to man, such as serial killers, war criminals, and people who think it's acceptable to use the word skibbity in a conversation. A place where murder, abuse, criminality, and suffering is the norm. This would be a rather interesting premise, but we unfortunately don't have access to Brazil nor Detroit in the game yet, as Mojang has yet to add them. Because of that, we will have to settle with the closest we can get to that description, which would be the Nether. So that is exactly what I've decided to do. I've decided to take on the challenge of beating Minecraft hardcore, but I'll be starting in the Nether. But if you thought that I came up with this ingenious plan myself, you'd be dead wrong, as I'm literally stealing it word for word from a comment on one of my previous videos. So a huge thank you to Lucas for being an absolute giga-chad. However, reading is not my strong suit, so I'm realizing now that I'm editing the video that I missed the wooden tools part. So that's a bit embarrassing. But moving on from my subpar level of literacy, as always with these hardcore challenges, I'm not going to be using any armor whatsoever. So as per usual, I got started with creating a world with an immensely creative name, to then go into creative mode to make a portal to the Nether, to in turn destroy it on the other side. And with that, the challenge was fully prepared for my conquering of it, in a very similar fashion to that of one of your parental figures. I rather fortunately started in a warped forest, which was absolutely ideal. One of the main hurdles of this challenge is getting your hands on wood, as that allows you to make tools as well as bowls, meaning that you also get access to food. Safe to say, this was absolutely massive, as I feel like starvation would be a rather underwhelming death in the Minecraft equivalent of hell itself, as that would essentially be the equivalent of dying to salmonella in a zombie apocalypse. So with our first milestone of acquiring wood and basic tools completed, I got on to having a look around, but I was rather quickly faced with the devastating and possibly cancerogenic discovery that the warped forest we had spawned in was even larger than my general sense of insecurity in life. So with the situation being suckier than a supercharged Dyson, I powered on by grabbing a bunch of wood to in turn gleefully bridge over a sea of lava. Once that cheek-clenching endeavor had been handled, I realized that my perceptive abilities had gotten the better of me yet again, as I immediately stumbled upon a nether wastes with a fortress. However, I was most certainly not complaining, as this meant that I wouldn't need as much external help with my mental health as I had anticipated. At this point, we had essentially found everything we needed, except for food, which would be rather helpful as I was about to get ganged up on by blazes in a penetrative context. So our next objective was to find both types of mushrooms, as that is the only viable food source we have in the Nether. We could potentially also have tried to find a crimson forest to kill hoglins for pork chops, but I very much preferred to not deal with a bunch of roided aggressive pigs, so I opted for the mushroom-based strategy, and after having stuffed my pockets full of recreational enjoyment, I got right on to mining a bunch of gold, during which I managed to find my way to a basalt delta and grab some stone to upgrade my tools. As you may have guessed, I was intending to use the gold to barter with piglins. There were 4 reasons for this. The first was that I thought it would be nice to not be very flammable whilst fighting blazes. Second was that I wanted a bow and arrows so that I could bully the previously mentioned blazes from afar, as my favourite kind of bullying is the one where they can't fight back. The third reason was ender pearls. We could potentially have killed a bunch of endermen, as we had a warped forest nearby. However, I usually use boats to trap the endermen to bully them, using the previously mentioned philosophy. But you can't actually craft boats using netherwood, so I wasn't particularly keen on the idea of potentially getting violated by a tall man in black speaking a foreign language. The fourth thing we needed was obsidian, as we needed to build a portal to make our way back to the overworld. So after having spent an eternity digging more gold than Jeff Bezos' ex-wife and pulling an Uno reverse card on a vaguely suggestive sounding cloud, I lured a bunch of armed pigs into a hole to exploit them financially. But even half of Jeff Bezos' fortune wasn't enough to get a single ender pearl or potion of fire resistance. However, my level of patience is comparable to that of an average father helping their son with their math homework. So I decided to simply rush in and risk my life for absolutely no reason at all. But rather luckily, I didn't stumble upon any armed and tall men in black looking to cause an ending of a career, which allowed for a certain release of tension in my gluteal structure. However, the good news didn't end there, as I also stumbled upon a blaze spawner that was completely caged, effectively reducing the probability of me getting severely manhandled into oblivion by at least 12%. Though I was still not entirely safe, as stated before, since I was too impatient to keep bartering with piglins. We still didn't have any potions of fire resistance, meaning that there was still significant tension in each of my previously mentioned gluteal components. But a genocide won't get carried out by itself, so I got to work, and took the admittedly rather unnecessary risk nonetheless, and as per usual, this paid off, meaning that the most dangerous part of beating the game was over with, as we had gotten ourselves 11 whole blaze rods by the time we exited the fortress. All that was left now was to get enough pearls and obsidian to make our way out of this absolute Brazil of a hellhole. So back I went to my gold digging activities. This was just as exciting, fun, engaging, and thrilling as watching curling. I genuinely have no idea how anyone can find enjoyment in that, but to each their own, I guess. But with that over and done with, and we had gotten our hands on enough obsidian and pearls, we could finally get on with our lives and leave this slightly less miserable and unsafe version of Detroit. And for once, my portal actually generated on the surface rather than a cave at deep slate level, which was a surprise for sure, but a very welcome one. So I started throwing our eyes and made my way over to the stronghold, and as I was on my way to end my suffering, I fortunately ran into a village, as I had been exploiting the deformed inhabitants of Detroit financially. I did get my hands on a bit of string. However, I was not intending on making the fatal mistake of trusting my capabilities in this game. So I would ideally need as many beds as possible to blow up the weird space lizard, whose home I was about to invade in a rather violent manner. That way, I could ensure that I wouldn't get to the dragon fight and have to awkwardly stare at it whilst it heals back all of the damage my beds had caused. I also stole all of the village's produce, as crafting mushroom soup every time I got hungry was about as convenient as trying to replace your phone with a landline. And once I had stolen everything the village had that wasn't nailed down to the floor right in front of the inhabitants that could do absolutely nothing but watch, my journey resumed. After having walked the same distance that Taylor Swift would have used her private jet for, I arrived at the stronghold, but this time, I surprisingly managed to find the stronghold in the first hole I dug, which was rather unusual, as I tend to get severely screwed over by Notch himself. And in my search of the portal room, I ran into the main issue of the last update, as the stronghold had generated in the same spot as a trial chamber, meaning I had to deal with one of the most annoying mobs added recently. After having spent almost 4 whole minutes in this place that I can imagine smells like Asmongold's kitchen, I finally found the portal room and made my way into the end. And as I stated earlier, I don't trust my capabilities in this game, so I started taking out all of the crystals, just in case I would fail killing him with a bed, like some absolute casual. However, this dragon apparently had some absolute pro gamer strats, as it completely blocked off my path to the portal, which was incredibly annoying, as this meant that I couldn't use my bed on it on the first perch. So I continued penetrating it into submission with my aerial sticks until it decided to get in my bed to subsequently explode. And with that, we had successfully beaten the game and our adventure had come to a close. So there we have it. I beat the Brazilian edition of Minecraft Hardcore. A big thank you to Lucas for being a Giga Chad and commented about this idea. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'll see you in the next one. And feel free to leave a comment if there's a specific challenge you'd like to see me take on.